You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds, the owner of Summit Properties Northwest, Reynolds and Kline Appraisal, and your host of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. One of the main questions that I am being asked all the time right now is, are property values in Seattle declining? Are property values in Bellevue declining, areas here in my hometown? And I think people want to know, okay, the economy is basically at a standstill. How does that translate to housing prices? So I'm going to take a hard look at that in today's podcast. What I'll do is I'll start with kind of some generalities, and then I'm going to dive into specifics. It's basically sold data that I've come across in our Northwest Multiple Listing Service. So I'll get into some actual examples of what's selling, what's being canceled, what do pending sales look like, what do our active levels of inventory look like, things that affect our housing market in general. So we'll start at the top. We'll start at kind of the broad spectrum, and that is the economy is not going, and we are at a shutdown, and people are staying home, and people are losing their jobs. Does that affect the housing market? Yes, absolutely. But to what impact? And one of the big things in this slowdown or this recession, a huge difference between this one and 2008, is in 2008, the main cause of that slowdown was the housing market. And this in 2020, April 2020, our housing market was doing great going into this slowdown. And then all of a sudden, boom, it got kind of stopped, got put the whammy on it. And so there's some major differences between the two. Now, when you do have millions of people, we had 22 million people as of last week apply for first-time unemployment. That's an enormous number. Now, a lot of those people will go back to work once the shutdown is over, but there's also a lot of companies that won't open back up. And those are some of the impacts that I think are going to have more of a hit on the housing market than what we're experiencing right now. So another major impact, another major thing that is kind of insulating the housing market is going into this slowdown, into this shutdown. We had basically very little inventory, around a month to maybe a month and a half in some areas. And sometimes it was diving underneath a month, which is basically housing is sold out. If you wanted to go out and get a house in the Seattle area, very difficult to do. It was just there's so many people competing for such little inventory. And has that changed? It's changed a little bit, but you've got less inventory now in a lot of markets, but you've also got a lot less buyers. With people staying at home, only the truly hardcore and people who absolutely need a home are out there doing their thing right now. Now, I am hearing from a lot of my brokers, and I'm hearing from appraisers, hey, we haven't really seen a slowdown yet. We haven't really seen a drop in pricing yet. And from my brokers, what I'm hearing is that a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers are putting off any kind of housing until maybe mid-May, maybe early June, kind of waiting for this shutdown to get lifted, whenever that might be. And then I think you're going to have an explosion of activity. And so then I think you're going to have kind of a rebound of the housing market. But then what will happen is we'll have that rebound, and then the real impact to the housing market will be after that. It will be after all of the companies that are not able to reopen. After that, that will have a major impact kind of moving forward in a much bigger picture, I think, and a much bigger drag to the overall economy. I could be wrong. Maybe we just all bounce back like some people are predicting. But I think there's going to be so many businesses that aren't going to be able to open back up, and those employees are not going to be able to find jobs. And that's going to be tough on the economy. And a lot of those are jobs that are on the front end, are on the lower rungs of employment, and those folks have a tough time getting a job anyway. And I think a lot of those are the jobs that are going to go away. And so you're taking out basically your first-time home buyer out of the equation, or a good portion of it. And that's definitely going to have an impact, because this whole thing it's all linked together. You can't take out a whole bunch of first-time home buyers and expect the whole housing market not to have some impact. Another major impact, or another major factor of where we are with housing, and interest rates are super low, basically historic lows. So really low inventory with really low interest rates. Now you've got low numbers of buyers out, but you've also got low numbers of sellers out, because people, unless they have to do something in this market, they're not. They're kind of hunkered down. One of the stats that I was looking at was canceled listings earlier. And I thought that was interesting that I've been looking at like the 1 day stats, 3 day stats, and then 7 day stats. That's kind of what I've been looking at to see over the last week, where do we sit? Because our monthly numbers, we won't really know until we've had all of April go by, and today is April 20th. And so until we have a full month go through, I don't think you're going to see the real impact of price depreciation. And right now, I don't think there is any. I don't think you're seeing prices drop. And I'll get into that in a sec. But so the people who are selling are people who need to sell, maybe a relocation, maybe people who have had this in the pipeline a while, and their real estate brokers have told them, hey, you're still going to get top dollar. Let's do this, even though this is awkward. And so that's what we're seeing happen, is people who just want to move forward anyway. And then buyers, maybe buyers that are being relocated here, buyers that added another family member, did something where they needed to change their circumstances. Those people are out and about as well. And people are getting a little bit nervous as far as we need to get our housing squared away before the school year, whenever that might be, starts up again. So people are, I think, kind of mentally thinking about making a move or putting the home on the market or buying a home, but they're not actively out doing anything, not in major numbers. There are some numbers, but activity is definitely down from where it should be, considering that this is April, and here in Seattle, we've had some amazing weather the last, 10 days. And that usually tends to bring people out. And I think people are going out. They're just not necessarily buying homes in droves, because it's a difficult process right now. You can do it. You can view a home via Zoom. But like we've talked about in different podcasts, is people want to be able to, have the entire family go through and really get a feeling for a home. And that's difficult to do. But I know one of the stats that I saw from Realtor.com was that like a quarter of the homes that are being closed, people haven't seen. I have a hard time believing that stat, but maybe there's one family member or two family members that haven't seen it. But that is really kind of going away from where real estate has been, which is you want to be able to go through the home 2 or 3 times, measure things, do that kind of thing. And when you have a Zoom walkthrough or a Facebook walkthrough or any kind of digital walkthrough, it's just not the same as being there in person and just really getting a feeling for the home, because you're going to live there, and it's also the biggest investment of your life. So you want to make sure you've got things dialed in. So I think a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers are holding out until the shutdown gets lifted, and then we'll be kind of back in business. So volume is way off. And I don't see that changing until the shutdown gets renegotiated. I know we've got lots of plans for when people think things might go back to work, when various different businesses will kind of be back in the game. But I think that's a ways out yet. And so people are kind of more in the planning phase right now, talking to real estate brokers. There's a handful of listings going on. There is some activity, and things are moving. It's just at a much slower level. So let's jump into some of the stats of what I've got that I've kind of come across. I'm going to start with new listings. So today is Monday, April the 20th. We've had, as of about 11 o'clock in the morning, we had 49 listings come on. So not an enormous number, but to me, a decent number considering we're going through a global pandemic and the economy is basically shut down. So there is still activity out there. And that's one of the reasons that I think residential housing has historically done okay through a major pandemic, and it's also done okay through a recession because people still need a place to live. That's the big difference between residential and commercial. And with this commercial deal in the coronavirus, I think a lot of what you're going to see is businesses shutting down that can't make it, and they're going to have to negotiate or give up leases, and landlords are going to have to deal with businesses not being able to come back out, as the case seems to be, because the stimulus package probably won't be able to hold enough businesses together to keep everybody still coming back in business after the shutdown is over. So new listings, fair amount of new listings out there given kind of where we're sitting. And I don't see any market with just crazy huge numbers of active listings. Like there aren't enough active listings for pricing to come down. That's kind of the bottom line. If we had, 2, 3, 4 times the inventory out there, that's when you can start to see things ratchet down price-wise. But there just isn't that out there right now. And that is the case with a lot of major metropolitan markets that have really strong employment centers. You've got Seattle, you've got Portland to some extent, decent jobs there. You've got San Francisco, you've got LA, you've got New York, you've got London, you've got Sydney. A lot of those big cities, they have super expensive housing, but they've also got jobs that back it up. And so here in Seattle, we've got a great tech environment. You've got Boeing, when Boeing's in business. You've got a lot of businesses bringing jobs in here and not a lot of housing on the market. And so I think you're going to see a real squeeze on active listings and inventory when things kind of do go back here, because everybody's going to jump in at once. Number one, they want to finally get out of the house. And number two, they've probably been thinking about this for a while. And so I think you'll see the floodgates kind of open up on real estate, especially given the fact that this is our busiest time of the year, is typically February, March, April, somewhere right in there. And I think February was strong. March, first half of March, great. I think they had great numbers. And then second half, obviously, just the wheels came off the cart. So you've got some really interesting dynamics here. But I think residential housing long-term is going to be okay. And I think for the short term, you're not really seeing any price drops so far. But we'll kind of keep going here. So pending sales. So those are homes that have gone from active to pending. They're not closed yet, but they're going through the price, or they're going through the paces of getting sold. And what I tried to do is I tried to keep all of my data limited to homes that have only come on the market since the pandemic really broke out. So maybe since the beginning, late February, early March. And really early March is when we kind of started to look around and go, oh, this thing may be bigger than we think it is. And so pending sales in March, basically most of the pending sales that have happened have taken place on homes that have been on the market for literally like under a week. So here's the days on market of some of the stuff that I'm looking at. 9 days, 3 days, 3 days, 2 days, 29 days. And that was a condo. 2 days, 2 days, 2 days, 2 days, 31 days, 19, 5, and 4. So a lot of stuff, if it's priced well, is still selling under a week. And that is kind of a testament to low inventory, super low rates. Buyers are out there taking advantage of more buying power with historically low interest rates. One of the things that I think moving forward will hurt buyers more so than they're dealing with now is restrictions from lenders, because lenders are really getting squeezed with the way the forbearance deal is coming about. So residential servicers, guys who you make your mortgage payments to, those companies are being told, hey, you have to accept a forbearance, but you are still, as a service company, you are still obligated to make the payment to the bondholder. So until you get some liquidity issues worked out with the residential mortgage market, you're going to see residential lenders really tightening up their criteria for you as the consumer to be able to buy a home. So that's something that I think is really important that real estate brokers, buyers, and sellers all make themselves aware of, is that the mortgage market is tightening up as we speak. So pending sales still happening. One of the other category that I looked at was price reductions. Where are the biggest price reductions happening? And for the most part, the further out you go from employment centers, the bigger the price reductions were. And so I'll kind of just give you a rundown super quick of what a lot of the price reductions are. Okay, up in Mount Vernon, which is probably an hour north of Seattle, you go from 200 down to 190,000. So they dropped it 10% or $10,000, which is 5%. In Shoreline, which is basically North Seattle, maybe a 15-minute drive into downtown Seattle, you've gone from 5.25 down to 500, so a drop of 25 grand. Another one, a condo in Seattle, went from $899 down to $849, and then a lot of them are $20, $30, maybe $10,000 price increment drops. And so these are properties that have been on the market, call it underneath a month and a half, maybe underneath 45 days. So they've had exposure, they've been on the market, they're probably not getting the activity that the sellers want to see. So they're doing some kind of price drop. But those price drops, the price drops that we're seeing, are pretty typical in any market. And if I dove in even further on this data, I think what you'd see is that some of the sellers are being a little aggressive on their pricing. And that's typical day in and day out in the real estate market. Sellers want to put their home, get top dollar. Well, let's put it on for $900, and if we don't get it, we'll drop it to $850, because we kind of know $850 is more in line with the market, and that's probably what we'll get. But we're really greedy, so we want to just put it up there and see what happens. That's what I think you see so often. So Marysville, that's up north. You went from 405,000 to 400,000, not a big drop. Bellingham, way north. We went from 640 to 620. Let's grab something from Port Ludlow. That is over, I think, Hood Canal. We went from 474 to 449. That's a decent little price drop. Sammamish, that is east of downtown Seattle. 900 down to 870, so 30 grand, so like a 3% drop. Pretty normal, not a huge drop, but not a small one either. Here's a condo in Seattle. We went from 899 down to 879, so just a little bit of a drop there. So I think your price reductions, they are not showing an across-the-board massive drop like you might see when you've got a ton of inventory on and sellers are trying to outpace the next guy who's going to make a price drop. You're seeing price drops that are reasonable and are getting down to market value. And I'm seeing that with the pending sales. The ones that are going pending are the ones that are really adequately priced. So let's jump in now. And these are the categories that I'm looking at here now that I find are real indicators of what is actually closed. Because on the appraisal side of things, I own Reynolds and Kline Appraisal. On the appraisal side of things, the number one thing that we look at is closed sales, because that's what really tells the story. Active listings, they don't mean anything. They just mean we know what the property won't sell for or hasn't sold for because it's active, it's on the market. Maybe it sells super quick, that's fine. But then look at it when it is a closed piece of data, because that is hard evidence of where the market is. Pending sales, again, those are good. It shows that, okay, here's what somebody is willing to make an offer and go into a contract for. But pending sales blow up all the time. And heading into what we've been dealing with for the last month is that we had a lot of deals go sideways. And I think every brokerage out there has had the same thing. You got buyers that got skittish. You had sellers who were like, you know what, I'm going to wait for this thing to blow over, and I'm going to take my chances on the other end. I haven't had too many sellers who have been, oh my gosh, this is the last chance we're ever going to get to sell our home. People are not knee-jerking that direction. They're more like, let's put a hold on this and kind of wait for things to happen. Let's see where it goes. So let's jump into the closed sales. And what I did is I tried to take as wide a swath of sales. I didn't get a ton of stuff from down south, but I got a handful. I wanted to go basically kind of going from Canada to the north, because that's where our MLS goes, all the way down to Oregon on the south, and hit a few cities in between, but mainly focused on the Seattle market, because that's what most people are concerned with and they can identify with. And one of the major things is that if you are in a market outside of Seattle, or maybe you're a little further outside of any of the metroplex that's around you where the major employment centers are, the days on market is going to be longer. The price reductions are probably going to be greater to get a home sold, and you're going to have greater drop in price during this whole pandemic than you would if you are super close in. And that's because there's just more demand for jobs closer into the major employment centers. And that is a trend we're seeing day in and day out across the board. And you're seeing it with other big cities as well. You're going to have a slowdown. You're going to have more property on the market. Hit the market, but it's also going to come off quick when you're closer in. It takes longer when you're further out. And so that's just basically urban dynamics. So the first property I pulled that I thought was interesting was down in Tacoma, and that was a decent family home. It was listed at $429,950, and it sold for $420,000. So it sold for about 98% of its list price, but it only took 3 days to sell. So it was on the market 3 days, and they had a deal put together. So I think that is a realistic seller in this marketplace. Hey, I'm going to give you, Mr. Buyer, a little bit of something, because you haven't seen that type of scenario in the greater Seattle market for a while. It's basically full price or above full price is what's been happening. So I think there's a little bit of a softening here, and that's normal. I mean, that is wildly expected given what we're dealing with the shutdown. Second property is in Lake Stevens. That's about a 40-minute drive to the northeast of downtown Seattle. It's kind of an outer lying city. The property there was a good-sized new construction or newer home, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, typical family home and a typical plat. And it was listed for $635,000, and it sold after 6 days and closed for $635,000. So full price. And that is an area where if you were to start seeing, 40 minutes outside of downtown Seattle, that's an area where you would probably see a little bit of a reduction of closed, the sales price, the final closing to list price. That's kind of the area you would start to see. And I expect to see that probably happen over the next couple of weeks. But for now, still full price in Lake Stevens. Olympia, that is the state capital of Washington, and it's about an hour 15-minute drive to the south of Seattle. And we had a home there listed for $584,950, and it sold for $590,000. So just about 101% list to sales price ratio. So that to me was very interesting down in Olympia, and that was on the market. That basically it sold first day I was on the market, boom, done, above list. Another one that was interesting was Arlington. That is a little bit to the northwest of Lake Stevens, still a little bit further out. 45-minute, maybe 50-minute with no traffic, and 2 hours in bad traffic, 2.5 hours in bad traffic. But it was listed for $250,000, and it closed for $250,000, and it basically sold same day on the market. And all of these properties so far have been within the last 15 days, something like that. So you've got some super quick closes in there as well. Here's one that's in Seattle. It's probably 3 miles to the north of downtown Seattle, so good Seattle proper address. $890,000. It sold for $875,000. So 98.31% of list price. So pretty darn close to full price, but a little bit of a discount. And that was after 14 days on the market. And that is what I think you're seeing a lot of right now, is a little bit of a discount to the buyer just to make them feel good. Hey, you got a little bit of a deal during this awful time in the marketplace. Here you go. Let's get this thing closed, that kind of thing. Here's another one in Linwood. That is up north, probably half an hour drive north of downtown Seattle. Good area. That came on. This is a strong family home. It came on the market at $428 and it sold for $430. So $2,000 over. And that was after 8 days on the market. So probably a little bit of a bidding war there. And it took somebody to go $2,000 over list price, and they got the home. So you can kind of see the trend is either right around list price, a tiny bit less, or maybe a tiny bit over, depending on how close they are to a major metropolitan center with employment bases. So I'll go through a handful more just to kind of give you a feeling. Here's another one in Seattle, probably 4 miles to the north of downtown Seattle, so close in. And it was listed at $890,000. And it sold for $890,000, so full price. And that was 14 days on market. Here's another one in Mount Vernon. That is way to the north, probably an hour and 15-minute drive. It was listed for $399,950, and it closed for $415,950. And so a little bit of above list price there. Here's a property up in Blaine that basically abuts the Canadian-U.S. border. I wanted to take one from as far north as I could. This property came on the market. It was on the market 28 days, and it was listed at $445, and it sold for $445, 100% list price. And that was a condo, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo, some big views. It was a nice condo, nice project. But stuff that's a little bit outside of the box, like that property, that's a fairly expensive condo for up in Blaine, $445,000. So you are seeing stuff sell that's a little bit outside of the box. Oftentimes that stuff will just sit and sit and sit, and all the other cutter stuff will get sold first. So you're seeing some interesting dynamics here. People are still buying properties is the bottom line. Here's one that was listed for $488. This is in Seattle. This is kind of this is the Lake Ridge area, so close in to downtown Seattle. Listed for $488, sold for $500. So it went over by $12,000, and that was on the market for 4 days. So super quick. Here's another one that was listed at $950, and it sold for $960 on the market for 4 days. And that's it's the Ravenna neighborhood of Seattle. And that came on and off super quick, 4 days on the market. But that's a really good, that's probably the closest in comparable sales so far that we've looked at. Another property at North 133rd Street in Seattle. That's probably 6 miles to the north of downtown Seattle. It was listed at $574,950, and it sold for $615,000. That had a bidding war. It was days on market of 2. And so, and that closed today. So 25, 35, close to $40,000 over list price. So there is still, even with everything that's going on, you're seeing bidding wars out there. Obviously, that's kind of the only real one that I could see a major indicator that was bidding wars. But I'm hearing that from a fair number of people out there. If you've still got a property that's close in, even though the buyer's pool is way smaller, there's enough people. It only takes 2 people to create a bidding war, and you're off to the races. So a lot of what I've just talked about is why the housing prices have not dropped. I see a lot of stuff online that the housing market's just going to get crushed, that it's just going to be decimated. People just automatically think 2008 and think we're going to be dealing with short sales, we're going to be dealing with foreclosures. Well, the market dynamics from 2008, we are wildly different in April of 2020, and that's a lot of what's going to brace the housing market for kind of the economic backlash of having all these people out unemployed. And hopefully with the stimulus package and with people going back to work when they do go back to work, and hopefully businesses, small businesses, are able to hold it together long enough to get back in the game, to kind of get things going where they need to be. Don't really know how that'll look, but it's going to be a struggle for a lot of people. In housing, I think 6 months down the road, we might be talking a different story than we are right now. But for right now, housing prices in Seattle, at least, are not dropping. I'm not seeing any major indicators that they will in the immediate future. You've just got too little inventory. You've still got enough buyers out there, and you've still got a strong job market here when the economy does open up. So all those things kind of working together, I think you're seeing a strong trend right now where housing prices are not dropping. Will they down the road? Yeah, maybe. Let's see. But a lot of other factors will go into that as well. So that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching this on YouTube, love to have you subscribe to our channel. If you've downloaded this on the podcast platforms, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. So once again, I am Sean Reynolds from Summit Properties Northwest, Reynolds and Kline Appraisal, and thank you for watching this episode and listening to this episode of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. We're doing a daily podcast until the shutdown is over, and so we'll see you on the next one. All right, everybody, happy 420. Thanks for tuning in. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.